Oh, there we go. Okay, I can't see how many people are in so far. I'll give it a second. But hello to everyone who has joined so far. Excited to get started here in a couple minutes. I will go over all the logistics and things shortly, but to get everybody thinking and start the conversation, it would be great if folks could drop in the chat, what is your research superpower? There's some couple ideas that immediately come to mind to get you thinking, like maybe it's bringing a fresh perspective or curiosity to every project, or you have this incredible ability to speak your stakeholders' language. But Eniola, what is your research superpower?
So I would say my research superpower. So back in like about 10 years ago when I started in the UX space, I started out in biotech. So I was having conversations with doctors and caregivers and patients. And some of the conversations were really vulnerable and really serious about different therapies or different diseases and things like that. And so I really learned like moderating with the act of building rapport and really holding space for these conversations. And so I'd say my research superpower is like really connecting with participants and making them feel comfortable, whether we're like in person and they're kind of nervous and it's their first time doing a session, or just like a little bit of banter in the beginning, just to make them comfortable kind of sharing the good, the bad, and the ugly. So I'd say that's mine.
That's awesome. That is such a great one. I know that that's, sometimes an underappreciated element of just like having that connection and really, I think it brings a lot to the research. There's a couple other people in the chat that sounds like connecting is a big one for them as well. Using improv skills to make people comfortable. That's a fun one. I can be really funny. That's great. Like, I wish I could pull some of that energy. Awesome. Well, thanks so much, everyone. We'll go ahead and get started. It looks like we got quite a few people who have joined. Thanks for everyone here so far. Welcome, everyone. So great to have you here for this session. We're going to be focusing on what happens after the readout and how to ensure that your research drives action. To start with a few housekeeping notes, we will be recording the session, so do not fear. We will be sharing it out afterwards in about 24 hours. You can rewatch it or share it with your team. Any and all are welcome. We'll have some time for the Q&A at the end, so there should be a box at the bottom of your screen. Feel free to pop them in throughout the session. We will try to get to as many as we can at the end. Alrighty, sounds great. We will go ahead and get started. If you don't know me, I am Stevie Watts. I am the brand marketing manager here at Dscout. You may see me kind of popping around through the People Nerds community. I curate a lot of the content over there and love to interact with a lot of you. And I will also, but I'm way more excited to introduce Eniola Abioye. Eniola is the founder of UX Outloud and a lead UX researcher at Meta. Eniola, could you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Yeah, hi everyone. Oh, I'm so excited. I'm Eniola Abioye. I'm a UX researcher, as Stevie said. I'm also a founder, which feels really interesting to say, but I guess it is true. I'm a UXR career coach, and I've been doing this for about 4 years now. And I've been doing UX research for about 10 years now. And it just really gives me so much energy and gets me really excited talking about UX research and coaching folks and mentoring folks. And still doing the research. I have a lot of fun leading research at Meta. So yeah, excited to chat today.
Awesome. Thank you so much. To get us, started again with another question, I'm going to kick the conversation off. Actually, let me see if I can find this really quick.
Sure.
I'm sorry, having some issues with Zoom. Let's see. I wanted to launch a quick poll on how effective is your current research sharing strategy on driving impact. Let me pull it up. Here we go, polls and quizzes. Alrighty, I'm going to relaunch the poll. I'll give folks a second to answer. But again, how effective is your current research sharing strategy? 1 being not at all effective and 5 being very effective.
It's so cool watching all the answers come in.
Fly in, yes. I'll give people a couple minutes.
Very cool. Okay, we got some 5s. Amazing.
Couple 5s.
Not
5s, look at that. You should be chatting
right?
with us. Yeah.
I know. Come on.
Share your tips.
Add as a panelist. Oh, that's awesome.
Okay, I will go ahead. I'll give it one more minute. All right, I'm going to go ahead and end the poll.
Very cool.
All right, so let me share the results with everyone so you can all see. So it looks like majority threes, got some fours, a few fives. Thankfully,
Oh,
only a couple ones, it looks like, but you know, threes and fours are telling us that it's probably time to get this thing started and start sharing some strategies. So I'll go ahead and stop sharing. Thank you everyone for participating. Um, let's get into it. So Eniola, I know this is called after the readout, but as we've talked about in some previous sessions, one thing that's just as important as after the readout is what happens before the research even starts. So setting yourself up for success at that time is extremely important. Can you walk us through how you set yourself up for, beforehand for the aftermath?
absolutely. Yeah. So like you said, like setting yourself up for success really makes a huge, huge difference. And so I take myself through a scoping process that I've kind of like iterated on throughout the past few years. And so doing kind of like this internal marketing campaign right before the research even starts. And that's another research superpower. So anyone who comes from like a market research or a marketing or advertising background, it's a huge superpower because building impact, you got to do some digital marketing online, like talking with teams and telling them what you're about to do research about and kind of where it plugs in and like allowing people to have the back and forth of like, oh, I'm really curious about this question, or this really resonates with my work, or can you ask this question too, since you're talking to them, and kind of stir up that excitement about, oh, research is happening. We're going to hear from users, because product teams tend to get really, really excited about that because in their roles, they're not able to talk to users at a big scale. And then in that scoping process, I take them through 6 points for myself. One is establishing this baseline. So what stage of the product development process is the product in currently? How are we doing? What is working really well? What's not working well? Kind of like, what does our overall current state look like? And then the key metrics that we're most interested in tracking. I find that the metrics that we're tracking are usually the ones that the organization is most dedicated to changing. And so that gives us the idea of like, okay, these are the metrics we're paying attention to. So this is kind of what our objectives are going to be around or where our product is going next. The next one is timeline, because we know timing is always such a big element of when we do research and how we do research. And so understanding what the product timeline looks like and like when Eng is looking to code complete or when people are looking to launch or kind of like what the politics around the timing of when your research comes. Because if you can line up the time to when people are looking for value to be added and add value there, even if your research is not completely done yet, it just makes that conversation much more relevant for all the parties that you're trying to be relevant for. So timeline super important. Then of course we have our research questions. And so I invite my cross-functional partners to share the questions that come to mind. They don't have to be neat and pretty and in a discussion guide yet, but just having the core questions that are going to influence people's work. And then the hypotheses too. So not just getting, what people are interested in knowing, but what are their best guesses already? Because oftentimes we have a best guess, or even sometimes we build based on those hypotheses. And so being able to go back and think, okay, what do we know now? And how are we going to answer that question? If we couldn't do the research, what would the likely answer be? And then intended impact. And this is my favorite one because intended impact, establishing that before starting the research project is essentially like going into it with intention, right? So I want to know from my stakeholders, okay, we're doing this project. I'm going to answer these questions for you. Then what's next? What's going to happen? What are we going to do with these? And even drilling into, okay, if we get a positive response to this user flow, what's the next step? Or if we get a negative response to this, what's the next step? Or this product that we might build in the future, what's the next step to that? And if people have a hard time answering that, then that's a big sign that says that we need to take a step back and we need to have, a sprint, or we need to have a meeting with whoever the relevant parties are to align on that first. Because if you wait till the end, when the research is already done and you have these insights and that intention hasn't been set, or there isn't alignment yet on what the intended impact was supposed to be, then you're going to be kind of like rumbling around and trying to figure out how to apply your research, and like the insights might be getting cold, right? And so we know that as you leading up to research, there's a lot of excitement, and that can get cold just because of, projects are happening, or week by week there's been some shifts or a change in priorities or something. So if you don't kind of grab that while people are most excited, while the iron is hot, it might be really hard to go back and get it afterwards, right? So I think that point where the engagement is highest, when people are looking forward to something and don't know what's coming yet, there's the most buy-in you're going to get. And so I would just be really careful to set that intended impact beforehand. And that might come over like the course of multiple conversations with different types of partners, other researchers, but it's a really, really good one to have. So once you've set all those things, I find it really important and helpful to document those things, because then you have something that you can true back to. So when the insights come back, or when the learnings come back even, and as you're building insights out, you always want to true back to those objectives, to that baseline, to those metrics, and frame your insights in the context of all those things that you aligned on already, because then you're already speaking the language that people are familiar speaking. You're already kind of answering the questions and hitting upon the things that are most relevant to the business that you've already established. And so that's your document to help you write your research readout as well, because you're truing back to all of those things and calling those out, right? The things that we talked about, the things that are really important that we went into this project trying to get, here are those things.
I mean, I feel like you already segued it into my next question for you. So now that you wrapped up your research project, how exactly are you crafting your share out? How are you highlighting metrics, and how are you presenting your findings to be most engaging?
Yeah. So I think even before you're doing the readout and you're conducting the research study, when we look at the different methods we're choosing, or like how creative we're getting around who we're speaking to and things like that, it's important to name also the constraints that you're navigating, because then those will come up. That's important to share when you do your readout as well. So for example, if you are really under a time crunch, and so for that reason, you choose some unmoderated research, or you choose a survey or something for speed, right? It's important to name that in your readout. If you want to gather buy-in from stakeholders, or maybe your research organization is not as mature yet, and you want to share like video clips or sizzle reels to kind of build empathy with stakeholders who aren't necessarily used to user research yet, super important to share in your readout. If you, I mean, always you should be leveraging your existing data, whether it's implicit data, market data, into those questions as you go into your research, so that the questions even are data informed. So then by the time you make it to your readout, I think it's important, and I have been thinking about this concept for a little while now, of treating our stakeholders like they're our users too, because our entire function is built around human-centered design and taking a beat to build empathy with our users, think about what they say and what they think and how they feel and what they do. And so I think we need to take that same look at the stakeholders who we work with, right? What do their journeys look like when it comes to our PMs, right? We talk about UXR and PM all the time. What do their journeys look like? What do their goals look like? What metrics are they held accountable for? How do they structure their product roadmaps, and how do they move product forward and hit their goals? And understanding that on a level so deep that now we can engage in some service design around how we engage with them. So where are their pain points, or where are their knowledge gaps along their journey? And what are their jobs to be done? So then we can apply the like points of value at those points that they're looking for them, or right before they're about to apply insights, or on a continuous basis throughout this portion of their journey. I think that's so important, right? Because we're really good at that. That's what we do. And so also extending that same kind of care and intention around our stakeholders, I think is going to get us a really long way in the beginning. And so in that same vein, get to know your stakeholders, right? Where do they engage? Where do they seem most excited? And you can do some iteration and some trial and error. So I found, like, over the course of my career, some people are really not into the share outs, right? Like it's nice to have, there's a recording there, but really they're more engaged when we have like one-on-one or two-on-one conversations. And so as I'm doing the readout, I'll typically do you know, a big presentation and record it and post it and things like that. But then I'll go into like some workshop style and like jump into a team meeting and see if I can grab 20 or 30 minutes to present the insights that are most pertinent to that team, and invite people to follow up with me and put time on the calendar for a one-on-one. Maybe I'll make sure to send out a pre-read so people can read it on their own, and so that they come to the share out with questions and with conversations to engage, allow people to comment and to speak up if they'd like to. And I think I've noticed, just like working with so many different types of people and interviewing and studying so many different types of like patterns of behavior, not everyone engages well in this big readout, in this like recorded session, like, you know, the time is now to ask questions and this is the only time. Some people really need like a couple days or hours to just like digest what was shared and interact with it, you know, in different ways, right? So they can reach out to me, or maybe I'll reach out to a PM or an engineer who seems to be really, really engaged. And like, that's what I mean when I say building relationships, right? Like one-on-one, talking to folks. If you have the chance to go on and do immersive research, inviting people that you're close with to come on those trips and kind of build empathy in that way and immerse themselves into it, because you always get that aha moment of, oh, okay, that's the struggle, or this is the cultural context that we're working within, right? So yeah, building relationships, I would say. And then I would say, like, one of the big things I do is I don't just invite my product team or the teams that I run research for. I invite anyone and everyone who might be interested in this research, because products intersect so much and research questions repeat themselves so much. So everyone can be on the calendar invite. And if if people don't have time to come, that's totally fine. I don't take it personally. But my teams, as well as the teams that are adjacent, you never know who's going to be interested or who's working on something or thinking about something that might be related to what you just did research on, or who's going to be working on something in the future, or someone who doesn't have a UX researcher on their team, but they're super excited about user research, right? So I cast a really wide net to when I send out my invitations. And that's the kind of thing that, like, when impact comes, maybe it's not in the following 6 months, but maybe it's in the year or the next year and a half where it comes. And maybe it's not in your specific team, but it's in another team that found what you did relevant, which is amazing for impact, because now it's cross team or cross org. And so not pigeonholing yourself into just sharing with your team, I think, is huge. And then after the research readout concludes, I do a roadshow. We've talked a lot about research in this current landscape, and like, how do we get people more excited about research, and like, how do we get them to engage? They're not engaging, but as researchers, we know better than anyone that it's really hard to change behavior. So we need to like take our own advice, right? The same thing that we say to our companies about users, right? Instead of like concentrating on like, hey, we need these people to do different things, how do we take the research to them? And so on a roadshow, like hopping into meetings, right? Or even like on a one-on-one, just like asking those questions and sharing those insights in those smaller settings, because I think some people are more engaged in those spaces, or like engaged differently with new information. And even like having these in like bite-sized bits, like it doesn't have to always be a formal 45-minute or 60-minute insight, because some people digest better in small pieces, right? So take the TLDR or the too long didn't read, and take the 5 top insights and recommendations on a roadshow and just start there, and then send people the context of, here's the full readout, here's what I did, here are some clips after that readout. I think the other thing for me is, like, obviously being at an organization that has quite a bit of researchers, we rely a lot on each other. So like going to my research team meetings and thinking about, here's what I'm going to share, like, am I missing anything? Should I connect the dots anywhere else? And like getting advice and getting a chance to talk through it out loud with other researchers. And then also kind of seeding it with them to say like, hey, if you hear anything that's relevant to this research, plug me or send them my way, or share this readout. And then you're like all helping to support and kind of spread the word and and build up impact for each other's work. And I absolutely did not forget about the people who are solo researchers. But I'd say even then, you still have research community that you can kind of bounce ideas off of and think aloud with. Because I think for me, at least, I think best out loud. And so getting a chance to just like bounce ideas off with someone or like talk out loud, even if the other person doesn't say anything, is so, so helpful for me. So if you are a solo researcher, or if you do feel like siloed in your roles, there are so many communities, right? UX Out Loud is a research community. People Nerds is a research community. So like hopping in that Slack group and connecting with other folks who know exactly what you're talking about and can help you like bounce ideas off. Yeah, I think the last thing I'll say is when you're presenting research, having as many examples so that people can actually like see and touch and feel the insights, right? And not just saying like, there's the insight, this is what we should do about it, but pulling in those examples that are most relevant to the teams that you're talking to, right? Like, and this is where you go back to that baseline of like what's working really well and who our users are. Put together the scenarios, or I like to even bring in the case studies from the conversations that I've had as I do qual research. So I'll share the examples of the people that I talk to and what they sell and what their behavior looks like to give people who didn't watch the interviews a sense of the types of conversations I have and to put things into perspective.
Amazing. Thank you so much. I feel like all of those ideas are so tangible, like they're so easy to, or like not easy is not the correct word, but great stepping off points for people to actually go in and try themselves. I think that's super exciting. On to the next. So after you've done this amazing share out, everyone's so engaged, everyone's on board. How do you ensure that your insights don't get shelved? How do you keep your findings relevant and ongoing?
Yeah. So this is a big one too, because it's not just, the goal is not just the readout, right? Oftentimes the impact comes after and will resurface. And so like keeping your insights kind of fresh and relevant is super important. And the way that I approach this now is instead of thinking about my projects as one by one, like I did this project and here's the readout, and I did this project and here's the readout. Instead, I look at my half or my year. And in the same ways that we plan, that product teams kind of plan for our year going forward and roadmap, I do the same thing with my research, right? So here are the top 3 or 4 questions that I'm answering in the half. And then as I am doing my projects, how do each of those projects ladder up to those questions that I'm doing in the half? Because then that helps me kind of organize in my head and on paper what the body of work that I'm building is, or the different bodies of work or buckets of work that I'm building. And then as I present those, or like as I go into like like before we're road mapping, like go into the summary of what we did in the half, I have those themes to kind of connect the dots between different research projects. So the more we move away from here are individual insights that pertain to this specific question in this specific product, it's here are the themes that we found out or that we learned around that we can share kind of widely organizationally so people can plug and play and apply the different insights to different things. So if we tee that up for them and kind of share that in that way, I think that's a huge difference and like makes it really easy to keep them relevant because they're not just dying out when that specific question has been answered, but it's continuously coming up and you're keeping them fresh and relevant. I think the other thing is where we're sharing these insights and making sure we're sharing them in multiple places. It can feel, especially for senior researchers, I think it can feel like, you know, these are my insights, they're my responsibility. This is my baby for my teams. And we know that research is a team sport. Like we say that all the time, but I think one of the ways to embody that is to share the insights with your research team and make sure that they're also aware of what's happening and like plugging it in spaces that you're not in yet. That includes your manager, that includes your mentors that are in the space, like making sure they're up on the work that you're doing and the things that came out that were super, super interesting. And with other research teams, but also speaking about these insights in places, in all the places where our product stakeholders are, right? So those team stand-ups and the syncs that seem to be kind of like, you know, engineer like rundowns of like the different tasks that need to happen. At the beginning of my career, I was like, why am I here? We're not talking about design. We're not talking about research. It's taking me a really long time to understand what we are talking about. So why am I here? Like, I'm not adding anything to the conversation. And I've learned over time that it's especially important for me to be in spaces like that, and hear about what we're prioritizing and hear about the objectives and what's happening and kind of the nuance of like what we choose to build and when we choose to build it. And then as I get more comfortable in the space, like interjecting, here's a learning that is relevant to what it is that we're building, or a question that comes up and I can answer it because we already know so much about our users' behaviors, right? It's not every question that comes up doesn't require a project. So building connections with those people and being in those spaces that might be a little bit uncomfortable, that's where UX research needs to be. Like, that's where our voices need to be, to build in UX research into the practice of our product team, right? We're not just asking them to relate when we've just recently done a project. We're asking them to integrate it into how they think and how they work. And so it takes being part of those weekly stand-ups and like interjecting UX research and design thinking and human-centered design, like fundamentals and like heuristic fundamentals, at every point. So like consistently being a part of those conversations. And then I'll also say telling a holistic story. So like when I'm working embedded on a product team or even like consultative, I'm like super, super close to my DS, because I think telling this holistic story of like, hey, we got qualitative data, we got quant, or knowing what it would be helpful to validate with qual or with quant, and like presenting the story of like, here's data that we found and here are insights that we've derived from these multiple points. And here's the evidence that we have to present these recommendations that we have. It's holistic, and it even is helpful to meet people where they're at, because it's no secret that some stakeholders aren't super familiar with UX research, right? It's not even like whether they're bought in or not, because if it's a priority at the company, it should be a priority for them, but how familiar they are and how comfortable they are with insights, with qualitative insights. Maybe they feel better with, statistical significance. That's totally fine. Let's give you a holistic overview of why we are making the recommendation that we're making and pull on different points of evidence.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Did you have more on that question?
I was just going to say the last thing I want to say, and I
Oh,
know
go
I'm
for it.
cognizant of the time that we have, is like product strategy in general is meant to be a conversation. So the goal of a readout or of doing research is not to go in and say like, hey, this is what I recommend, and everybody, like be writing it down and be like, okay, great, this is awesome. That's not necessarily even the most impactful way to like share insights, right? It's meant to start a conversation of like, oh, how can we apply this? And like pushback is super healthy, right? Because you want that back and forth. You want to be able to poke holes in any framework you're building and see if it stands or not. You're meant to iterate. Like even in this like agile environment, like we don't always get the recommendation right or the application right. And so that comfort of having the back and forth and talking through how we apply insights, or even like the validity of insights, or did we test the right users or the right segments, and are we leaving anyone out, right? That's all super important, and part of the process.
Amazing. A reminder, I'm taking a quick peek at the chat. A reminder that there will be a Q&A at the end, so definitely add your questions to the bottom, but we will get to them in just a little bit. Appreciate everyone who's engaged so far. Eniola, we've talked about this a little bit before, and I know you've touched on elements of this already, but can you walk us through how you build a knowledge base and continue expanding on that existing research?
Yeah. So I shared a little bit before, but like I think step one is like taking a step back and looking at like the different subjects you're building a knowledge base around, rather than just the specific questions. And that can be done like project by project, or you can like do projects over a half as you would, and then try to like pull up the themes or the buckets that happen or that you saw like naturally, and start building up that muscle. I mentioned building a research roadmap, which I think is huge and something that I do for myself and I do with my teams. And then keeping your insights somewhere where they're going to be engaged with. So we talked about how do we make sure our insights are not like put on the shelf and get cold, is like, don't put them on a shelf. Like don't put them somewhere where you have to, go somewhere out of your way into a platform that you don't use every day in order to interact with those insights, we have to pull them to where even we're like spending a lot of time, because like we're humans too, we're people, we have differing priorities and things like that. So to keep them relevant for ourselves and top of mind, we have to put them in the place that we use all the time. So if your team is like constantly on Slack, find a way to start to integrate your research learnings and insights into Slack. Maybe it's a weekly research or like a notes from the field or something, and like on a consistent basis, kind of sharing and like digging up and resurfacing or like bumping research insights to the top. If you're, if you use a different platform, or if you use I don't even know the different platforms, but if you, whatever you use, kind of integrating those things to where they are. If your team is big on like putting together strategy docs, then those research insights need to be like consistently throughout those strategy docs as well. Because the point is, remember, we're not trying to like change behavior and tell people, hey, you do this, you use these platforms in your work, use this thing because it has user research. But I think starting with bringing that into the places where their eyes are already looking on a consistent basis. And then as they build their muscle, they'll be more likely to go in and interact with research and maybe a research library platform or somewhere else where it can be a little bit more comprehensive. But in the beginning, kind of like finding out where their eyes are and then bringing research there. And maybe that's in calls, maybe that's in quarterly recaps, maybe you're presenting in team meetings every so often. But just like being consistent and like bringing UXR, even if it's not the same insight, but just bringing insights in general into the play as often as possible.
I think that's excellent advice. And honestly, even from the marketing side, like that is excellent advice. Like pull your content, pull your insights where people are. I think Slack is an excellent tool for that. That's where people are already chatting. Get in front of them. That's amazing.
Yeah. I think we like downplay the importance of marketing in general. And like as I have like grown as a business owner and founder too, I realized like, oh, I have to learn how to market. And it's like it's not automatic, right? So it's not enough for us to just do the research and be like, this is great, this is really impactful. People should come and get it, and people should use it because it's telling us about our users, and that's super interesting. But we have to market, because in the people from that background, it's not enough to have a good product. It's not enough to have good insights. You have to kind of like understand where people's gaps are and value proposition, right? So all those things that we have to do to sell a product, we essentially have to learn them in order to share research impact. And it's so interesting because we think about, product teams are like PMs, or the people who are responsible for driving revenue. They don't understand what we do, and we care about our users, and like, there can be some tension there. But at the end of the day, they can learn a lot from using like our core skills, and we can learn a lot from using their core skills. So it's like everything is cyclical, everything is interconnected as always. And I just think that's so interesting.
I mean, we have one more question, but that is so relatable. I feel like, sometimes we'll create large pieces of content and things on People Nerds, like we made this giant, beautiful ebook, come get it, come get it. But in reality, it's like we have to get it to you. Like that's kind of, that's a key element there. And I think that I bet a lot of functions beyond, UX research, design, marketing can totally relate to that. It's like we built this thing, let's get it to you. But to wrap up this portion of our chat, I know we talked about this a little bit. Could you walk us through a case study highlighting a lot of these themes that you went over?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So I'll do an end-to-end case study because I like to give like the nitty gritty. Like, okay, it's great to like do all these things after the readout, but what does it actually look like? So back a few years ago, I was working at a fintech company. And we were building a brand new digital platform for people to interact with. And when I was at this company, the mode of engagement for UX research and product was kind of, it was like halfway between consultative and embedded. So I was embedded into some product teams, and then I was like over some like different elements of the digital platform. And so I had multiple levels of Zoom, and that experience really taught me how to like share insights, right? So when I was embedded into a couple of the pods, like payments, like running the payments, running the information reporting on the platform. And so I was doing a lot of usability testing, and we were trying to get this MVP out. And so some of the research that I was doing was super specific, right? We had, here's what people want in a flow. Here's what this is a bug, or this is an issue that's presenting drop off, that's resulting in drop off, right? And then some of the elements, or some of the themes that were coming out of these like individual flows and processes were bigger themes, like there are a lot of different segments of users that would be using this platform. And so to make it relevant for as long as possible, we need to allow for customization, right? Or maybe some people want to see different things on their dashboard because different things are relevant for different types of companies or types of founders. And so pulling up those themes around customization and around serving as many users as possible and allowing them to kind of customize their experience as they grew was something that everyone needed to know, not just the pods. And so I started, as I was doing kind of like these big kind of beta, alpha and beta tests, right? Pulling the themes up and the individual like pod specific insights up, and I took it on a roadshow. So with my individual pods, we talked about the insights and how we were applying them, and the themes that were coming out in kind of individual sprints. And then I did a massive presentation of like, here's what we're seeing, here's what the overall experience is looking like across the board. Here are some elements that we need to change. And then for our fast follows, for what comes after the MVP, these are themes that we really need to ingrain into how we even build out this platform in general. These are things that people are looking for, or that are differentiating us from other platforms in the market, that we know that we need to ingrain into every single thing we build for the users. When new features come up, this is a framework that we need to kind of test every new feature against, because this is what we're learning as and having these deep conversations with the people who are using our products. And so taking that approach of like making room for conversation and iteration, even with my product team, and then creating a big kind of body of knowledge around here's what we know and here's also what we will do in the future, not just like we answered this question and it's been checked off. Just really oriented me towards building this knowledge base and continuing to push it, and sharing things that are relevant for individual teams, even with other teams, because there are themes that are going to be helpful for them, even if they're not working on payments or not working on information reporting. And so I've kept that in mind.
Absolutely. I think that that's super helpful. Thank you so much for giving us that example. I know people will really find some nuggets to take away from there, but everyone, we're about to shift to our Q&A session. I know that we have had a few questions come in already. Thank you so much. Let me share my screen again, just to prompt folks to drop a Q&A if they haven't already. But before we do that, I wanted to ask the group to drop in the chat, is there any pieces that Eniola has shared so far that you're going to try out? Feel free to drop in the chat. We'll look at a couple as we're pulling these Q&As up. Sounds like so many have been taken down. And then I saw one that was Eniola for president. So this is your official campaign.
The last thing I want to do is be president.
Yes. I mean, hey, it's not too late, right? It's only May. But let's see here. Yeah, some great ideas. Thank you so much. Road mapping. Yeah, love it. All right. Well, thank you everyone so far. Eniola, we'll shift to asking you some questions. First of all, what activities/meetings are you involved with that help you keep the insights fresh?
Yeah. So I think it looks differently at every organization. It's looked differently in the different companies I've been in. But my team stand-ups is probably the best place to start. And I noticed that when I've been at different companies, the total team stand-up that has like all of the product team, there's a lot of conversation dedicated to end, but also to like product priorities and kind of keeping track based on the objectives that were set at the half. So those meetings for sure. I go to my team meetings, my research team meetings. I also go to kind of like, I get together with my other researchers and we like bounce ideas off and like talk through like what we're working on. Those are super important. Just like spaces where it's just like a safe space and we can talk about the things that we're still figuring out, like with the other researchers that I work with. And then I make sure to have one-on-ones with all my folks. So my data scientists, my PMs, even if it's not every week, every other week, just to make sure that the things that we're prioritizing for the week, or the knowledge gaps that we're looking to fill, or the things that are really exciting about our priorities, we keep that conversation going. And that also helps with building the relationship. Yep, I would say those three.
Feel like that really emphasizes as connecting being your superpower. I think that that's been a theme throughout. Another question from Monica, it looks like, so following up on Eniola's point about pre-sharing a report or deck before the presentation, do you find this affects the attendance of the readout?
So I hear what you're saying. Like, if people have the deck, what's the point of coming to the readout? And I honestly don't really look at the attendance of the readout. Because it's not super relevant to the impact. The readout is just one event, right? So if people are going to behave how they want to behave, right? So if someone interacts with the information better on their own, kind of digesting the slide deck, that's totally fine. That's why we have that collateral thing and that we build and we share it with them, right? If someone interacts with it better, kind of having a focus time to synchronously talk about it and hear, me describe the insights in my voice, amazing, right? So I would say let people interact with the documents and the deliverables as they want to, and then just follow up with them. Because even if they do come to the readout, you should follow up with them if they're super close to the product space.
Awesome. And then how do you help your product teams plan out research needs and questions far enough in advance that you can plan your half year? This person's teams tend to be more reactive.
Yeah. So when it comes to reactive research, it's going to happen, right? It's kind of, there's no getting away from it. Even with very, very mature research practices, there are going to be questions. And because the nature of being in technology or being in an agile environment, things are supposed to move quickly. So questions are going to come up. And so when it comes to reactive research, I advise folks to kind of meet their stakeholders where they are, right? Because if a reactive question comes up, and instead of doing the work or supporting the team, we're like, no, this is all wrong. Shut it down. Let's start over from the top. That's not going to get us very far. And that's also going to stifle the work that the team is able to do. So meet folks where they're at, do the research as it comes up. And then as you're helping them to build that muscle, kind of think back to the answers to that reactive question. How could we apply them to the questions that we had even before those questions came up, and kind of build the muscle of here's how we can be more proactive by asking these questions ahead of time, or taking the themes that we learned and applying them to the other things that we're doing. So over time, it makes more sense for them to be able to predict and plan ahead. And then I'll also say, as we plan out our halves, just like product teams do, to take on that same practice, right? So again, learning from our product stakeholders of road mapping, setting in the objectives, prioritizing the questions that we're going to answer half by half, and then executing with some flexibility for shifts as they always will come. And then, starting a month before or 6 weeks before the next half, doing that process all over again, and then doing that process all over again. And as you continue to do that, your team gets used to it, you get used to it, and you're able to plan out the core knowledge gaps that you're looking to fill, with room for other things that come up. But you have those, maybe it's 4 or 5, depending on the capacity of you or your team. Maybe it's 2 or 3. What are those big questions that you're going to answer? And then the other projects can ladder up to those big kind of themes that you're looking to touch on that half.
Amazing. I think we have time for about 1 or 2 more. I saw this one. So this person works in a very hierarchical and siloed company where it can be difficult to get in meetings with people who need to see the research. How do you recommend getting your research in front of upper level management?
Yes. Oh, I love this question. So I'm hoping this person has a manager, and has a manager who's pretty hands-on. And so in those meetings, those manager meetings are not just for you navigating weekly tasks or anything like that, but you want to share your research insights and share your the deliverables and the dots that you've connected in those meetings, because the role of a good manager is also to like up level and pull those insights and pull your work into spaces where you're not in yet, right? So working with your manager to say like, hey, where am I missing things? Or like, is there someone that I should follow up with specifically that I can like, you can loop me into a conversation with, or can you loop this into a more strategic meeting that's happening at your level? And then also having that same kind of relationship building with your skip or your manager's manager, and saying the same thing of like, here's some really exciting stuff that I'm working on. Where do you think it makes the most sense to connect the dots? Is there anyone that I should be talking to? Are there any spaces where I should be talking to? And basically asking for their sponsorship. Right? There's a difference between your mentor and your sponsor. So like think of your manager as like one of your mentors who's helping you in the nitty gritty of like, what to do and like how to get creative and how to unblock things, but then also talking about your work in other spaces. And then think of your skip as your sponsor. So they're in rooms that we aren't in, right? And don't need to be in all the time, but they have the context of what we're working on and what's really interesting. And they also have a different level of zoom over the organization and what different product teams are working on. So in order for them to be able to plug your research and plug what you're doing, they have to know about it. So you have to be able to share that with them and keep it fresh for them so that they're able to help you keep it relevant.
That's excellent advice. Honestly, some of these things I'm like, I need to note this down for myself. And let's just do one more. We have a bunch of questions. Just a heads up to everyone that at the end of this, we will plug a link to our People Nerds Slack community, as well as resources to get in touch with Eniola. So we'll have to answer some of the questions offline. We'll get to as many as we can, but for now, we'll just do one more. Do you track the impact of your research on things like recommendation uptake, conversion, or even revenue? If so, how do you approach this?
So yes, it is our responsibility to track the impact of our work. And so there are a few ways that I do that. When in that initial scoping document, you should be recording things like what the key metrics are and what your baseline is, in context of those metrics, right? So that way you have documentation of like, here's where we were when we started. And then at different points throughout the half, or like, at the end of each half following your research, you can check in on those same metrics, right? Because remember, those are metrics that were already being measured. So typically they're measured longitudinally. So it's not this like, oh, I have to go and figure out how to even define my impact or anything like that. The impact should be predefined based on the objectives that you have and the metrics that you're using to track. And so I follow up with my DS typically towards the end of the half when everyone's following up with them because we have to write reviews. But just saying like, hey, can I check in on these metrics that we initially worked? Like what happened? What are some trends that you saw throughout? And is there anything that we can do to kind of build a cohesive story on what that impact looked like? I also like talk with my PM regularly, right? So like recommendation uptake, we're talking about those recommendations constantly, or we're getting together and we're building things together, right? Because PMs bring a light and a knowledge about how product is built and how we structure like our approach to revenue and our objectives, that's not always front of mind for me. So it's really great pulling us like together and being able to just like riff and whiteboard together and thinking about that throughout the half, but then also at the end, kind of having those conversations of, okay, let's do a retro, let's do a debrief of what happened, how did this go, and what are we going to do better next time? So it feels like this team effort rather than I'm this UX researcher and I'm trying to get you to use my research. Like it could be kind of self-interested that way. And instead kind of involving into like, how do we build this thing together using each of our toolboxes, each of our superpowers. Yeah.
We end on superpowers again. I think that that is a perfect wrap up. Eniola, thank you so much. I'm going to switch to my next screen here so people know where to find you. Thank you so much for your time and your wisdom. I think that based off of the chat, a lot of people got a lot out of this. So really excited to continue this conversation in some other spaces. Eniola, I attached your UX Out Loud website and your LinkedIn, but tell people where else they can find you.
Yeah. LinkedIn is awesome. It's an awesome place to connect. Feel free to reach out and message me if you have questions. I love them. Give me a little bit of grace on getting back to you. Sometimes it takes me a couple days, but I'd love to interact there. There's also my website, which is here on the screen. All the events that I'm doing, and if you're in the Bay Area that I do in person, are up on there. Everything that I like put out, or like courses and things like that, are also on my website. And I make sure to post about them in LinkedIn. So if you're on the website, on the email list, which you can join via the website, and then on LinkedIn, you will know all the things. UX Out Loud is also on Instagram.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And for Dscout and People Nerds, we will drop a link to the People Nerds Slack community. Also, of course, subscribe to the People Nerds newsletter if you have not already. Thank you so much, Eniola. I'm excited to continue this conversation in a lot of other channels. I know we'll be talking a lot about impact a lot this year. So definitely will be more opportunities to discuss. But thank you so much, everyone. We will talk to you soon.
Yay.
All right.
Bye,
Bye. Thank
everyone.
you.